Good evening from Washington. I'm Larry O'Connor. Hey, you remember a few weeks ago, maybe a couple months ago, there were a lot of liberals and Democrats and pundits and even some people in the government who was saying that whole COVID-19 thing, the lockdown, the mask mandates, the vaccine mandates, hey, let's just move on from that, okay? No need to explore why we came up with the decisions we came up with. No reason to point fingers of blame. It was the fog of war, you know, we were just trying to save lives. Let's just have a little amnesty and move on. And, we're not really inclined to do that, right? I mean, in my world, if you want forgiveness, if you want repentance, if you want absolution, you actually have to first acknowledge you did something wrong, then ask for forgiveness, and then promise not to do it again. It's pretty basic when it comes to forgiveness, at least in the Judeo-Christian ethic. Now, why are we resisting the idea of amnesty? Why are we suggesting that maybe at the very first step, those who inflicted these things on our country should at least acknowledge that they did it? Well, let me give you an example. Frequent guest here on the program is Congressman Kevin Kiley of California. He was questioning in the House of Representatives the Secretary of Health and Human Services, Xavier Becerra, and specifically asked one very simple question. Did we see any health benefits, public benefits, from forcing 2-year-olds to wear masks? It's a good question, isn't it? I think we deserve an answer to that question, don't we? I want you to watch this exchange, not just at the great work that Congressman Kiley does, but at how your government, how your Secretary of Health and Human Services, who spearheaded that policy for your children, for your grandchildren, watch how they treat this issue.
Mr. Secretary, did forcing 2-year-olds to wear masks save lives?
Do what now?
Did forcing 2-year-olds to wear masks save lives?
Making sure people wore masks when it was appropriate was essential to make sure that we were able to get out of this pandemic.
Sure, but that wasn't my question. Could you answer the question that I asked?
Which is?
Did forcing 2-year-olds to wear masks save lives?
And who did the forcing?
Well, your department, or the Head Start, which is under your department, had a mask mandate until late last year for 2-year-olds and above, even outdoors. So can you point to any public health benefit of that policy?
Right. We never forced anyone to do anything because we don't have the jurisdiction or authority to do that.
Here for a quick moment, because this is a really, really instructive thing to see. Now, I want you to think back from March of 2020 through, I don't know, maybe about a week ago. There were a whole lot of things you were forced to do, weren't there? I mean, your business was forced to shut down. Your company was forced to only allow a certain number of people inside the office or inside the store, or maybe none at all. You were forced to keep people standing 8 feet apart. You were forced to have plastic shields up in front of anyone who was talking to a member of your staff, right? You were forced to wear masks. Try not wearing a mask while flying on an airplane over the last 4 years, 3 years. The kids were forced to conduct their classrooms on a laptop at the kitchen table. The kids were forced to sit 10 feet apart in desks if they were ever allowed to go back into school. The kids were forced to wear masks even when they were outdoors playing on the playground. And now your Secretary of Health and Human Services is denying that that ever happened. We never forced anyone to do anything. Did you feel like you were forced to do some things? You bet you were. Let's watch some more.
Provide guidance on what would be
Mr. Secretary, did Head Start have a mask mandate?
We provide a mask mandate, a requirement for jurisdictions that wish to receive money to provide particular services.
So Head Start did have a mask mandate for kids, yes?
We had a mask mandate for for agencies that wish to get federal dollars.
So that's a yes. So can you point to any benefit,
not a yes to
any
your
public
question.
health benefit from that policy, whether it was recommended or enforced or forced, of requiring young children to wear masks?
Did families benefit from the policy of using all protection, all precautions to avoid
No, I'm not asking you to
COVID?
rephrase my
Yes.
question as some abstract question that you'd rather answer. I'm asking that you, as the person who's the Secretary of Health and Human Services, right now, can you point to any evidence that there was a public health benefit to forcing young children to wear masks?
Well, the fact that today we are not losing lives the way we lost them when we first got into this pandemic.
And you think that's
is a
because we
clear
forced
sign.
2-year-olds to wear masks?
That's your interpretation. What I'm saying to you is that using good policies that give us the precautions to keep our families from contracting COVID are helping save lives.
I want to quote to you from an article from NPR in January of 2022. It says, the United States is an outlier in recommending masks from the age of 2 years old. The World Health Organization does not recommend masks for children under age 5, while the European equivalent of the CDC doesn't recommend them for children under age 12. In retrospect, was it a mistake for the United States to defy the international norm on child masking?
The U.S. has been working closely with our international partners, and we have done more than any other country to try to help.
But that's not what I asked you. I asked you, was it a mistake to defy the international norm on the issue of child masking?
We continue to use all the best practices when it comes to making sure people take the precautions.
Is there a reason you're not answering my question, Mr. Secretary?
I'm answering the question the best I can because you keep phrasing questions that are already geared to get a particular answer.
Mr. Secretary.
Yeah, you're trying to get a particular answer to that phrasing. Yeah, the particular answer is yes or no. It really should be that simple. Did we actually save any lives by forcing 2-year-olds to wear masks? Yes or no? Was it a mistake to be an outlier and not follow the protocols that other countries had, where 5 years old was the youngest, in some countries even older than that? Yes or no? See, this is how we learn from things. And first you have this man, your Secretary of Health and Human Services, denying that there was any forced masking of 2-year-olds, then kind of reluctantly acknowledging is that, well, we had a mandate, but only if people wanted federal money. That's how things work in Washington. You want money, you better wear a mask. And then thirdly, finally, when confronted with the reality, he still refuses to acknowledge that there was any benefit from it, let alone acknowledge the actual harm. Now, why is this important? Because they keep saying, oh, mistakes were made, but let's move on. But they don't acknowledge the mistakes. They keep saying, oh, don't blame us. We were doing the best we could do, but we've learned our lesson. But they don't acknowledge that they learned anything. And here's the most important part. What happens when we have the next pandemic? Listen, we're not looking for revenge here or retribution, maybe a little bit, but we're really looking to set our policies moving forward so that when the next pandemic is thrown our way by our friends over in China, we actually have some sound, wise policies to learn from. Which brings us to Representative Jerry Nadler of New York, who yesterday in the House of Representatives kind of threw his guy, Xavier Becerra, under the bus. All that denial and, oh, there was no mask mandate, and it's hard to tell, and we're not sure. Jerry Nadler, he says, you're damn right we masked 2-year-olds, and we'll do it again. Watch.
It protects against transmission of the disease to the next person. And the healthcare worker certainly ought to be required to be vaccinated. And when we have a pandemic like COVID-19 pandemic that we had, 2-year-olds should have been required to wear masks. It would be child abuse for parents not to do that because there was no vaccination available for 2-year-olds. And the only way to protect...
It's child abuse if you don't put your kid in a mask. You betcha we require masks for 2-year-olds. You're damn right we'll force your 2-year-olds to wear a mask. I deny I did it before. I have no idea whether what I did or didn't do had any benefit, but you're damn right we'll do it again, given the opportunity. Nah, no forgiveness here. Not quite yet. There's more to come on O'Connor Tonight. Keep it here, Salem News Channel. We are on the verge of such an exciting time in this country. I love presidential primary season. The debates are going to start in August, and we're going to make sure that we've got great advocates for all the Republican candidates for you right here on O'Connor Tonight. We're loading up, and we've got one of my favorite guys who was just a lion on behalf of Donald Trump during the 2016 campaign, and he was part of the administration. He is the former Assistant Secretary of Health and Human Services, Michael Caputo. Michael, great to see you. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me. Great to see you, Larry.
And I know you love politics too. And listen, you are an advocate for President Trump, but I love seeing you engage on the issues, on the topics, on who the best candidate is. I can tell you've got a passion for this system that we have in America, and may the best man win.
It is. I've worked in dozens and dozens of campaigns in 9 or 10 countries I wrote the election law for the Russian Federation and for Ukraine. The first draft, of course, they've changed it a million times. Many years ago, I've been doing this for a long time.
Yeah.
I don't know that it's a passion as much as an addiction, because the downsides, there are so many.
Well, and we should remind people the downsides. Because you were involved in the 2016 campaign and because you effectively helped President Trump win that election, you were the target of James Comey, of Andrew McCabe, of the Justice Department, of Robert Mueller. They bankrupted you. And no charges were ever filed, were they?
No, and in fact, now we know it was all grew out of a campaign tactic of Hillary Clinton that everybody embraced in the federal government. I always used to laugh when my friend Roger Stone would talk about the deep state, but then I met him. It's a horrible experience, but it wasn't just mine. It was really about 50 families. We think about Paul Manafort, Roger Stone, Carter Page, J.D. Gordon, the other folks. Those are the frontline people. There are a lot of people whose names you don't know, and people who didn't want to go out and talk to the media. And we all have kids, by the way, and it affects the kids. There's been attempted suicides. There's been kids being pulled out of school, and it goes on and on and on. And as we find out, it's nothing at all. And here we are. Which
brings us, of course, to the spectacle this week of these 37 federal counts. And it's like happening all over again, but on steroids. And I want you to respond to what we're seeing in the mainstream media when Chuck Todd and Rachel Maddow and Jake Tapper, they wring their hands and they're just dumbfounded that it seems that these federal charges actually make President Trump more likable and more popular with the people who support him and actually swing people over to his side who were undecided. Can you help explain that for them?
Sure. I mean, I as a co-founder of Americano Media, we've done a lot of research into the Hispanic vote. One of the things we found is that they vote like everybody else on most of those issues, that we all care about economy and such. But when we get into things like our country behaving like a third world dictatorship where, one political party uses the federal government, the national government to imprison the previous president, happens all over the place. The president has spoken to it ad nauseum. It doesn't just irritate Hispanics whose families have run from that and who are the jury pool in Miami. It also irritates Americans who understand, who are not from Latin America, who understand that they've seen this movie before. And in a lot of ways, after all this crazy Russia collusion stuff where everybody was calling me a Russian spy, I'm married to a Ukrainian, by the way. I'd be really unpopular at home, right? But the terrible truth is we now live in Russia because this only happens in places like Russia.
Yeah. Michael Caputo, you mentioned Miami, the immigrants from Nicaragua, Venezuela, Cuba who were witnessing this, and you're right, they 100% know what's happening. They've seen this before, and so that brings us to this exclusive video that you're sharing with us. Apparently, President Trump just delivered a message to the people of Miami, to the people of Florida, via your outlet, Americano Media. Let's take a look at this video.
I want to thank all of the thousands of people in Miami, great place, for showing up at the courthouse and doing it in such an elegant manner, but showing respect because you recognize that this was a false and fraudulent indictment of me by corrupt people. To see the love and just the spirit was incredible. It was an incredible thing to witness. And the Hispanic community, Cuba, Venezuela, Nicaragua, so much, and so many people. I just want to thank everybody. It was heartwarming to watch it. The love, the total love and the spirit. So again, to Miami and to all of the people in Miami, which we've had tremendous success with, which is very, very special and a very special place. But more importantly, very, very special people. Thank you very much for being there. I appreciate it.
There you go. That's your first look at that video via Americano Media. And Michael, listen, this is Florida. This is Governor Ron DeSantis' state, where he just did incredibly well with the Latino vote in his reelection. But how do you respond? If you're Governor DeSantis, how do you respond to this?
Well, I'll tell you, Ron DeSantis is very popular in Florida. I'll tell you, we moved down here to get away from Antifa in New York, and one of the big inputs for us was the governor. He's a great guy. But right now, he's not doing real well when up against Donald Trump in the polls before the primary. We're still a long way away. But my guess is in Florida, especially among the Hispanic vote, which is so much a big part of the Florida primary, I think that this moves almost every conservative, certainly a likely Republican voter among the Hispanics, primary voter, over to Donald Trump. And the reason why is because they've seen this movie before, right? And they know that after their parents or their grandparents or even they ran from Cuba or Nicaragua or elsewhere, they came to America. There's really nowhere else to go. And they see this as an existential point. It's not just going to show up in the polls where the 2022 midterms, which weren't supposed to be any good at all, right? By any stretch, the Hispanics came out in record numbers, 41% for Republicans. That's up from, I think, 29% in 2012 Obama. It's a collapse for the Democrats. But what's interesting here is this will move another 7 to 9%. If we get 51% of Hispanics in the United States in the Republican parliament 24, the Democrat vote model collapses. And let me tell you something, that is the jury pool here in Miami.
Earlier today, speaking of Miami and the Latino vote, the mayor, the Republican mayor of Miami, Francis Suarez, he announced that he's now running for president. Is that going to make a difference at all in this dynamic? He's now the only Latino candidate for the Republican nomination.
Well, I mean, as usual, the local politics down here in Miami are kind of cartoonish at times, and there's all kinds of allegations against every single person serving in important places like the mayoralty. But remember, there's the mayor of Miami, and then there's the mayor of Miami-Dade. The real power is with the mayor of Miami-Dade. I believe that the mayor is running because he really wants to get his ideas out. I just don't think he's going to be able to transfer his tiny base in Miami, which is really split up because Republicans here are split on him. I don't think he's going to be able to translate that into something on a national movement. He's also very anti-Trump. I don't think he's going to even have a blip on the Florida primary. And if you can't win the Florida primary, you better not run in it, which is also, by the way, what Ron DeSantis is worried about.
Michael, our final minute here, and one of the reasons I like you as an analyst is, yes, you support President Trump, but oftentimes you tell it like it is, even if it's not necessarily to the benefit of Mr. Trump. A lot of people are saying that if the Republican primary is a referendum on Trump, Trump wins. But if the general election is also a referendum on Trump, Trump loses. How do you respond to that?
I don't think that that's true. I think the general election polls are still pretty far out. I think Donald Trump has a higher hill to climb than, let's say, another Republican, for example, Ron DeSantis, maybe. But you understand that what has made Donald Trump unpopular among some sides of the American electorate has made him immensely popular among others. And I think the real question for Donald Trump is if he can convince people that what's been happening to him is really happening to them. This, as you know, Larry, isn't just the fall of Donald Trump. Because of the way that the federal government has been weaponized against people like me and my daughters and my family, Roger Stone, Paul Manafort, but the way it's been manifested in power against Donald Trump. People know this is existential. Yeah. And I think he's going to be able to make that transaction in the general election, let people understand that it's about the future of America. We saw the fall of Rome. We're about to see something like it.
I think you're right. And by the way, every day that Joe Biden and his son and his brother and the rest of his family go without any kind of real investigation, let alone indictments, it rings that message home. Michael Caputo, we'll be hearing from you quite a bit between now and all the election days ahead. More to come on O'Connor Tonight. Just when you thought you've seen everything from the state of California, they're saying, hey, hold my Bud Light. We're going to do a little bit more. They want to take kids away from parents who don't so-called affirm their child's gender preference, their gender identity, any identity, in fact. Look at some of the testimony from the hearing over this new bill. Watch.
My name is Abigail Martinez. It has been 3 years and 164 days since I lost my daughter, Kiley. I miss her every single day. Let me tell you how she died. My daughter was murdered by a gender ideology. She was murdered by gender ideology. I beg you, stop pushing gender ideology. I don't want any parent to feel what I feel every day. Affirmation is not good for the health, safety, and welfare of any child.
Elected officials and members of the California state government think that they know best for that woman's child, that they actually have more wisdom, more compassion, more love, and more parental knowledge than the actual parent. We know about this testimony because of the great work of Tony Kinnett, investigative reporter at the Daily Signal, joins us now, host of the Tony Kinnett Show. Tony, this is heartbreaking. Thank you for covering this the way you did.
It's something that really boils my blood as someone who's watched education policy for years, also as a former science teacher, biology and anatomy and physiology, to watch entire groups of people ignore biology while at the same time driving a huge wedge between parents and their child with the means of the state. There's no reason that California has any business making gender affirmation one of the basic needs of a child under state law.
Yeah.
And not on, it's bewildering that we would charge parents with child abuse for this.
Setting aside the Orwellian warping of the language where gender affirmation, as they put it, actually literally means the opposite. It means allowing a child to change their biological sex. What they're doing here is insidious in warping the language about the best interest of a child. They're basically adding to the state code that gender affirmation is in the best interest of a child, and therefore, if a parent is not doing that, they are not acting in the best interest of a child, which then triggers the opportunity for the state to intervene. That's basically what we're looking at?
And not only parents, but schools, churches, hospitals all have to abide by the California Family Code and Penal Code when working with a child. If I run a business and I don't take into account the safety of a child, I'm liable for child abuse charges as the owner of that business. And under the California Family Code, that is exactly what's being put into place. And it's horrific.
A little bit more testimony I want people to see here. This is another mother. By the way, it appeared to me that it was all moms who were testifying against this. Tell me if I'm wrong. You covered it. And of every single race, every single creed, religion, ethnicity, it was across the board. It was a rainbow coalition against this, right?
There were 17 protesters that were for the bill. They all spoke English, and most of them were white. And then when it came time for testimonies against the bill, over 100, I actually lost count, all different colors, creeds, 2 different languages spoken, and parents and community members were enraged over this bill.
Fascinating. Take a look at this mom here.
I am Erin Friday, lead of Our Duty, an attorney and a mother of a girl who used to believe that she was a boy. AB 957 is the first bill in the nation to codify into law that a parent who does not affirm the gender identity of the child is abusive. There is no nuance in this bill. It matters not the age of the child, the absurdity of the identity, adopted comorbid mental health issues, or persistence. Family court judges will be compelled to favor the child who will affirm the child's delusion. Parents can easily game the system and use gender as retaliation against each other. What happens when one parent will socially affirm the child but will not agree to medicalize? Does the parent willing to do more transitioning prevail?
Yeah, these are all great questions, by the way, that she raises in her testimony, Tony, and it seems like the legislators not only ignored it, but they never even thought about those things too. They just were hell-bent on pushing this through.
No, in fact, Senator Scott Wiener, who was also the senator who was in charge of making California a sanctuary state for minor transgender surgery, he made his entire testimony about him. He said this is all a big right-wing media conspiracy to post pictures of him shirtless wearing leather at pride parades, instead of actually addressing the hundreds of testimonies of parents pleading not to have their families ripped apart by this new legislation.
Democrats dominate the state legislature in California and Sacramento, sadly. And so, of course, they dominated this committee. Was there any resistance in the vote?
Yes, there is one Republican state senator present who asked a lot of questions. Although I should say that there were several Democrats on the Judiciary Committee who questioned the language. They said it was poorly written, although they ended up voting for the bill anyway. There was one Republican senator, one lone man, who sided with the parents, and I've never heard statements from a state legislator like this before.
Yeah, in fact, we have that. Let's take a quick look at that because it's incredibly sobering. As a former Californian, this really hit me where I live. Watch.
I'm now in year 11 in the state legislature, And all the time we're proposing policies to protect children. After 11 years, I've come to the conclusion that we need to start protecting parents. That's just not happening. I've been here and witnessed a full frontal assault on charter schools, taking away parents' choice in how their children are going to be educated, to the detriment particularly of children of color. In recent years, we have put government bureaucrats between parents, children, and doctors when it comes to medical care. And now we have this, where if a parent does not support the ideology of the government, they're going to be taken away from the home. Now, I agree with both Senator Wiener and Senator Laird that today it only involves divorce proceedings. And frankly, a judge can already factor this in. But I can assure you it's not going to end with divorce proceedings. In the past, when we've had these discussions and I've seen parental rights atrophied, I've encouraged people to keep fighting. I've changed my mind on that. If you love your children, you need to flee California.
Wow, that is stunning. If you this is an elected official in California working in Sacramento for over a decade saying, if you love your children, get the hell out of here.
I can't imagine where I elected to the state legislature of Indiana, which is where I've been born and raised, that I would ever tell people to leave the state that I love. And not only did he encourage parents to leave, he said the minute that he's done being in the legislature, he's packing his bags and said, and I quote, "I'm moving to America," end quote. That's just an incredible way to frame the situation.
This will have clear sailing when it comes up for a vote, and then I'm assuming Governor Newsom will sign this, right?
It does go back to the Assembly because of the amendments that were made in the Senate. So both houses will have to vote on it before it will go to Newsom's desk. And of course, he'll sign it.
I think it's also important to point out that I'm not aware of any idea coming out of California right now that isn't embraced by the power in the National Democratic Committee, Democrats who run the show here in Washington, D.C. And by the way, Gavin Newsom will be running for president, maybe even this next election cycle. So this isn't just a California thing.
It's not. And when I look at state legislatures across the country, the Democrats in those state legislatures take a look at California and see that as the state that defines what they can get away with. And so not just in the battleground states, but also in the red states, you will see legislation like this. And it is no longer hyperbolic to say they are coming for your children and they will use the lever of the state to do so.
I'm curious, Tony, and again, I want to thank you for covering this the way you did for Daily Signal. The videos were compelling. I saw them on your social media footprint. Other than the parents and the heart-wrenching testimony, I'm sure on both sides of this, was there any scientific data shown? Was there any actual medical testimony to back up the idea of this gender ideology for children?
Yes, there were several doctors that both testified and also called in and said that they were against this bill because it was incredibly unscientific. But I do point out the testimony from Mrs. Martinez, who lost her daughter, whose suicide was driven by the incredible amount of hormones that were pumped into her daughter and the horrible social stress that was put on her as she was paraded around by the LGBT community to raise money. That is a host of really negative medical information.
Heartbreaking, but important, and that's why we really appreciate you joining us. Tony Kinnett, host of the Tony Kinnett Show, and a very important investigative reporter right now at the Daily Signal. Thank you, Tony. There's more to come on O'Connor tonight. Keep watching Salem News Channel. They keep saying we're in a culture war and conservatives are waging a culture war over our schools, where all I see is parents wanting to make sure that their kids are getting the best education that they're paying for with their tax dollars. And I think we're winning because you're starting to see some interesting alliances right now. People joining together, putting aside what had been political differences to unify around one thing: leave our kids alone. Joining us right now is one of the leaders in that message fight, Asra Nomani. She, of course, is with Independent Women's Forum, and she's the author of the book, Woke Army, The Red-Green Alliance That's Destroying America's Freedom. And Asra, I saw that in a suburb of Washington, D.C., Montgomery County, Maryland, which is incredibly liberal and dominated by liberal Democrats, that Red-Green Alliance actually had a little different look to it, didn't it? We saw Muslim Americans living in Montgomery County joining with conservative Christians trying to take back their schools.
It was just unbelievable. So, Larry, you know, I live in Fairfax County, Virginia. So I took the car up to past 95, crossed the border, Maryland lines, and into Montgomery County. And there, in front of the school board, were about 500 Muslim parents with their Christian friends. And across the street from them were about 25 white, woke women activists who were wearing, stickers that said things like, advocate for those without privilege, Black Lives Matter. And across the street, it was a sea of mostly brown, mostly Black immigrant parents who were carrying signs that said things like, protect our children.
Yeah.
And the woke army died in Montgomery County, Maryland.
Well, tell me about that. I mean, does this make a difference? You say the woke army died, and maybe on the street they did, but not in elected office. The school board's still going to do what the school board does.
Yeah, this was such an important fissure, but it is absolutely true. What has happened is that the Muslim community in the United States has mostly voted for the Democratic Party since 2008. And Montgomery County politicians have been elected to office largely with the Muslim vote. So now what's happening is that many Muslim parents and family members are recognizing that they are more aligned with the socially conservative values of the Republicans. And so there is a civil war happening right now, Larry, in the Muslim community. Clerics are now at war with the activists who have been part of this woke army. The Islamists, the Muslims, have joined together with the hard left in the U.S. to elect Democratic politicians. And now the Muslim leaders who are refusing this kind of, identity politics on sexuality and gender, they're saying no more. Yeah. They are refusing it.
So I think that this is, and listen, specifically in Montgomery County and maybe I think we saw this in Dearborn, Michigan as well, a suburb of Detroit where there's a large Muslim community. We see these alliances now forming. But this can be replicated whether it's a Muslim community or a Mormon community or a Hindu community, a Jewish community. When you start focusing on values and making sure that children are raised in the faith that you, the parent, choose instead of the woke left-wing ideology that the government chooses, that's when these alliances can really make a big difference. Can this replicate, Asra, across the country?
Oh, yeah, and it is replicating. So we're seeing it, just like you said, with the Armenian Christian families in the suburbs of Los Angeles. Glendale, California had a showdown between literally Antifa activists and these parents. I call them Antifa in places like Montgomery County, Maryland, because they're mostly women that are like the aunties in a community trying to have a showdown with the mama bears. But I just got off the phone, Larry, with 2 Black moms in DC public schools. They're in a charter school, and they are refusing this Pride Month indoctrination that's happening. It's books like this one, Gay BCs, Bye Bye Binary, books with words that children cannot understand. And just parents with common sense are saying, we don't want this in our little kids' hands. Hey, let adults live as they wish to live, but don't indoctrinate our kids. And so I'm seeing this as the issue that can galvanize immigrant and minority communities and really decide the election in 2024.
Asra Nomani, you're kind of the representation of exactly this phenomenon, frankly. We know your story, and you can sort of thumbnail it for us a bit because you sort of became awakened by this and became one of these mama bears protecting your children because of race discrimination in Fairfax County with regard to admissions policies at the top high school, Thomas Jefferson High School. We've covered that story before. But this is one of those red pill moments, as they say, where the moment your child gets messed around with, the moment these people come in and say that you're not being a good parent or that your child needs to suffer for the sake of the larger government agenda, that's when parents say, "Oh hell no, not in my life."
Yeah, this is something that a Twitter user called the intersectional collision right now. Right, what viewers are watching right now in front of Montgomery County Public Schools, we had that intersectional collision. The little bullhorn that the woman was carrying had the sticker that said that they are representing those that don't have privilege. Well, we parents have been told that we have, quote, privilege and we're white adjacent or part of the QAnon mom network when we dare to challenge these mostly Democratic school boards. And Larry, you're absolutely right. You know my politics too. I'm a classic liberal. You know, I have been a feminist in my Muslim community for women's rights. But you can't come after the kids. You know, they pushing it too far. And those parents are nice, sweet, good parents who want to allow adults to live and let live, right? But when you come for the kids and try to usurp the role of the parent, they say no way, because in all of our families, the parent and the child bond is sacred, and there's no state intervention that's going to be allowed in the hearts of a parent.
It's also important to point out here, Asra, in our final minute, that a lot of these families, especially these Muslim immigrants who have either come from the Asian subcontinent or from the Middle East, they've come because they wanted the freedoms in this country. They wanted to raise their children in a more secular society and allow, have them get a nice, balanced, secular education, but then raise them in the home with the faith that they ascribe to. This is the opposite. They're actually getting indoctrinated at the school system in almost the same way they did back home.
Yeah, that's what is so fascinating about these communities, Larry, and that's why I encourage all politicians to tap into this. These are families that have lived the cost of sectarianism. They know, just like Chinese American families, the cost of a war within a community and a society between people based on their identity. They have lost family, they have lost their own history sometimes in their countries. And that is our story. We have known the cost in Muslim society of sectarianism, and it is an America that we have chosen, where merit and equal opportunity define a child's future, not where they fit in the oppression matrix.
Yeah, got to keep having these conversations. We're waking people up instead of having them be woke. Asra Nomani, the book is Woke Army, the Red-Green Alliance that's destroying America's freedom, but you might have to have a follow-up on the new Red-Green Alliance, but the red instead of communism is red staters, maybe. There's more to come on O'Connor Tonight. You're watching Salem News Channel. Let's take a look at where we stand right now in America with regard to transgender policies in our schools and in our state and even federal healthcare system. Specifically about a parent's role in the decision to allow their child to transition from one gender to the next. Of course, this involves a change of name, a change of pronouns, a change of clothes, a change of hairstyle, and all those things. But then it starts to become a medical issue with puberty blockers, with cross-hormone therapies, and then ultimately surgical intervention. And let's be clear, all of those things are permanent. Yes, the hormone therapies, the puberty blockers, even when you get off of them, if you choose to detransition, the effects will last forever in many, many cases. And one other thing about those hormone blockers, they've actually never been tested and approved by the FDA for the purpose of gender transition, for the purpose of treating gender dysphoria. So that all seems like it's still a little untested, right? And yet, we've got government entities from school systems to state agencies and even federal agencies that are trying to allow these drugs to be prescribed for children without a parent's consent. And in the state of California, we're seeing right now that if a parent doesn't give consent, that child could actually be taken away from them. They could lose custody because they're making a decision that is not in the best interests of the child. Now, that's some very serious stuff. One would hope that there was a lot of scientific examination and discoveries that would back up such a drastic decision. One would hope that the science was absolutely 100% slam dunk on the side of the people who were not only pushing for this gender affirmation, but doing it without a parent's consent to their own children. Well, I'm sorry to tell you that it doesn't look like they have that kind of scientific consensus, not by a long shot. Please look at this testimony in the House of Representatives yesterday. This is Congressman Dan Crenshaw talking to a Dr. Meredith McNamara, the assistant professor of pediatrics at Yale School of Medicine. Yale. Now, see, there was a time in this country where a congressman or a TV host or just an everyday average American citizen would not be able to venture into the realm of scientific and medical ideas and decisions for their child. They would rely on a professional expert like the assistant professor of pediatrics at the Yale School of Medicine, right? That's their job. They're supposed to know these things. Well, watch this.
You've said that we've cherry-picked data. How do you mean that?
So it is very unscientific and flawed to pick a single study or a single statistic and to discuss it in isolation.
Totally agree.
Medical experts are able to talk about all of the evidence as a whole.
Totally agree. So it's good to look at systematic reviews, right? That's the gold standard of evidence when you're trying to understand whether something works or whether it doesn't. So the British Journal of Medicine looked at 61 systematic reviews with the conclusion that, quote, there is great uncertainty about the effects of puberty blockers, cross-sex hormones, and surgeries in young people. The Journal of Endocrine Society came up with the same conclusion, even the American Academy of Pediatrics. They all cite the lack of evidence. And so here's the thing. If you're doing a therapy, and it's, temporary, whatever, fine, maybe let's try it, let's see if it works. But when you're talking about permanent physiological changes, do you not agree, just from an ethical standpoint, that you might want extremely strong evidence of the benefits? And there is no systematic review that states that there is strong evidence of benefits.
Sir, are you aware of how the quality evidence grading system works and how it's applied?
Yeah, we read through it. That's why I'm citing these journals. So which journal says something different? We should have that debate. Tell me a journal that has done systematic reviews that cites different evidence, that cites strong evidence for benefits of these therapies.
The standards of care were developed based on extensive...
You're not telling me any journal, you're not telling me any study. Don't say standards of care.
Yeah. So...
Tell me one.
The standards of care.
That's the standards of care. That's not a journal, that's not a study. That's not an organization, that's not an institution. You're just saying words. Name one study.
Yeah.
I'm out of time. I yield back.
Name one study. Name one journal. Not 10, not 5, not 2, 1. And she couldn't. She couldn't because there isn't one. There isn't one study, not one medical journal that has affirmed that this is the safe and proper scientific medical approach. That's why, as Congressman Crenshaw just cited, our friends in England and in Scandinavia have decided not to move forward with this kind of care for children. Perhaps, maybe we should do the same. That's it for tonight. We'll be back same time, same place tomorrow. In the meantime, I'll see you on the radio.